Picture your own street tomorrow morning. No engines, no voices, no lights flickering behind curtains, just wind moving through empty windows. Now, here's the question nobody really wants to sit with. If every single human being vanished overnight, which animal would end up ruling this planet? There are more chickens on Earth right now than any other bird in history, over 20 billion of them, almost all depending on people to survive. Dogs, cats, cows, pigs, entire cities of creatures shaped by human hands. Picture standing in your own kitchen, the fridge humming its last hum before the power grid finally dies, and somewhere outside, an animal already sniffing the air, sensing that something has changed. Logic says the strongest would take over. The fastest, the biggest, the smartest predator waiting at the top of the food chain, finally free of the one species that ever challenged it. That's the story everyone expects. Lions, wolves, maybe something venomous and patient. But here's a detail worth sitting with for a second. Some of the animals closest to humans right now wouldn't last 6 months without them. Not because they're weak, because an entire species can quietly become dependent on a system it doesn't even know exists. So which is it? Does the king of the jungle story hold up, or does something stranger happen the moment the lights go out for good? And still, against every instinct telling you this should be simple, the real answer isn't about strength at all. Stick with this, because the actual winner of this hypothetical isn't who you think. And the reason why says something uncomfortable about how fragile human control over nature really is. Here's what would actually happen hour by hour if humans disappeared right now. Within the first few days, house pets would be the first to feel it. Dogs, if left in yards or loose homes, would begin roaming in small packs almost immediately. That instinct never really left them. Cats, on the other hand, adapt faster alone. Feral cat colonies already number in the hundreds of millions worldwide, proof that felines barely needed humans to begin with. Ever wonder what happens to a zoo with nobody left to open the gates? Within about a week, most enclosures would fail. Fences rely on electricity, and once power plants run out of fuel, roughly 3 to 5 days for most backup generators, locks stop working, water pumps stop cycling, and predators housed a few feet from prey would suddenly share the same air. If you were standing in a major city 1 month in, you'd notice pigeons first. Populations would spike briefly on stored grain and garbage, then crash hard once that supply ran out, because pigeons, like so many urban species, were never truly wild. They were adapted to landfills and bakery windows. Speaking of numbers that don't add up the way people expect. Right now, subscribing to keep tracking details like this costs nothing and takes about 2 seconds. A small habit that helps this kind of research keep getting made. Within 6 months, rats would explode in number in cities with no waste collection, then collapse from disease and starvation just as fast, because rat populations rise and fall almost violently based on food access. Meanwhile, out in farmland, cattle and sheep left unfenced would slowly disperse, and within a year or two, most would either die from predation or, in isolated cases, begin reverting towards semi-wild herd behavior their ancestors once had. None of this points to one clear ruler yet. It points to chaos first, collapse second, and only much later, order. So what fills the silence once the chaos finally settles? To understand who actually rises to the top, you have to understand something most nature documentaries skip entirely. Dominance in an empty ecosystem isn't about who's strongest. It's about who fits into the gap left behind. Ecologists call this an empty niche, a role in an ecosystem that used to be filled, now suddenly vacant, waiting for whichever species can exploit it fastest. Humans didn't just occupy space on this planet, they occupied dozens of ecological niches at once. Top predator, primary landshaper, seed disperser, waste producer, even climate regulator in some regions. The moment humans vanish, all of those roles open simultaneously, and it's not the biggest animal that grabs the most territory. It's the most adaptable one. Here's a hard negation worth remembering. Apex predators like lions or tigers do not automatically inherit human territory. Big cats are actually among the most vulnerable animals in a post-human world, because habitat fragmentation, poaching pressure, and genetic bottlenecks already pushed many populations to the edge. Removing human conservation efforts might accelerate extinction for some of them rather than freedom. Quick question. If the strongest don't win, who does? Generalist species do. Animals that already thrive in disturbed, unpredictable environments. Raccoons, coyotes, wild boar, certain crow species. Coyotes, in particular, have already expanded their range across nearly all of North America, despite not because of heavy human presence, proving they don't need humans gone to succeed, they just need humans distracted. And that detail is about to matter more than it seems, because the same pattern already happened once before, somewhere humans left behind entirely by accident. In 1986, after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, roughly 1,000 square miles around the plant were evacuated almost overnight. For decades, scientists assumed radiation would leave the area a dead zone. What actually happened surprised almost everyone studying it. Wolves, lynx, wild boar, and even the rare Przewalski's horse moved back in astonishing numbers, some populations growing several times denser than in nearby human-inhabited regions. Remember that empty street from the very beginning. The wind moving through empty windows? Chernobyl is what that street becomes 20 years later. Not silence, but movement. Life didn't retreat from the absence of humans. It expanded into it almost hungrily, radiation and all. That single accidental experiment quietly answers half of the original question, which brings up something worth thinking about. If an entire ecosystem could recover this fast after disaster, imagine what it does with time and no interference at all. If this kind of pattern fascinates you as much as it should, following along means catching every piece of it as it unfolds. And honestly, what's your best guess so far for which animal actually ends up on top? Drop it in the comment, because the next part changes things. Not every species gets this happy ending though. Some animals depend on humans so completely that human disappearance would functionally end them, not free them. First, consider commercial livestock breeds. Modern dairy cows, for instance, have been selectively bred for so many generations that many can no longer give birth without human assistance, a syndrome directly tied to breeding for udder size and calf proportions. Without veterinary intervention, large portions of some cattle breeds could die out within a single generation. Second, consider certain dog breeds. Bulldogs and similarly flat-faced breeds often struggle to breathe, regulate temperature, or give birth naturally, entirely dependent on human care. Left alone, many purebred lines would vanish quickly, while mixed breed, feral adapted dogs would likely survive and interbreed into something closer to their ancestral form. Third, and this one surprises people, think about honeybees in managed hives. Wild bee colonies would likely survive fine, but the managed hives that pollinate most commercial crops rely on beekeepers for disease control, particularly against mites. Without that intervention, many managed colonies could collapse within a few seasons, like a switch turned off gradually rather than all at once. It's a strange kind of exception, isn't it? Species so deeply shaped by human need that freedom from humans becomes its own kind of ending. And if breeding created losers in this scenario, it also created a wild card nobody's mentioned yet. There's a layer to this most people never consider: how animals would start reading each other differently once humans stop being the loudest, most disruptive presence in every shared space. Right now, predator and prey species across the world have adjusted their behavior specifically around human activity, not around each other. Deer in suburban areas, for example, are statistically far more likely to be startled by a car door than by a nearby coyote, because their nervous systems have partly recalibrated around human noise as the primary threat signal. Remove that signal entirely, and something subtle happens. Prey animals become more relaxed around historic predators for a period, simply because the loudest disruption in their environment disappeared. Studies of areas with reduced human presence during recent years actually showed measurable increases in daytime activity among species that had shifted to nocturnal behavior purely to avoid humans, meaning some animals were essentially hiding from people, not from each other, all along. It's statistically more likely that a raccoon today avoids a human than a dog, even in the same backyard, on the same night. That single fact says everything about who the real disruptive force in most ecosystems has been the whole time. So if the loudest threat disappears and behavior shifts back towards something older and quieter, what does the final picture actually look like once every piece settles into place? Go back to that empty street one more time, the one from the very beginning. The wind is still moving through the windows. But now, months or years later, something walks past. Not a lion, not a tiger, nothing built for a nature documentary's dramatic climax. Just a coyote, maybe, moving with the same quiet confidence it already has today, in cities, right now, while humans are still very much around. That's the answer nobody expects walking in. There is no single king, no coronation, no dramatic battle for dominance. Just adaptation, quietly rewarding whichever species can bend the fastest to a world that no longer bends around one particular species at all. Humans weren't ruling nature from some throne above it. Humans were simply the most recent variable in a system that's been rebalancing itself for a few billion years, long before people showed up and long after they be gone. Maybe that's the real, quietly unsettling truth in all of this. The planet was never really waiting for permission from anyone standing on it. If this whole idea kept you thinking longer than expected, hitting subscribe means never missing where a question like this leads next. So go ahead and like this. If it changed how you picture that empty street, and say in the comments which animal you'd bet on now that you know the real answer.